Another sector of society in which there are huge opportunities for VR and also for AR is, of course, education. So when I think back of my time in secondary school, I remember that there were all sorts of things that I was supposed to study and learn. And this was mostly based on textbooks. So it would mean doing your homework, reading about certain things, and then at some point there would be an exam. And those books typically contain a lot of text and also some pictures. And then on the basis of that type of information, you would sort of gradually learn things about, for instance, other times or certain important concepts that will be important to study. For instance, I remember I had to study and learn a lot about the Roman Empire at some point related to history. So I would read a lot about the Roman Empire. I would look at some images that were made to sort of resemble that time, what things looked like. And in this way, I sort of learned a little bit about Roman Empire, what it looked like, when it existed, etc. Of course, these days, now we have VR and also AR, which you can imagine that this could lead to a totally different learning experience. So rather than just learning about, reading about the Roman Empire, you could actually just visit the Roman Empire. You would use, for instance, those relatively cheap cardboard glasses, hand them out to all students, to all pupils. And they would place them in front of their eyes with their smartphone. And through an app, they would be actually viewing what the Roman Empire would be like 2000 years ago, for instance. And then the question is, of course, wouldn't this be a much nicer way and a much stronger, convincing way to teach people things? So wouldn't this make a much more lasting and convincing experience of, for instance, the time in the past compared to when you just read about things and you have to imagine yourself everything that you read? I think that's those methods offer very interesting opportunities, and it might just be the case that this type of learning leads to a much better retention and recall of information than just when you read about something and see some images. Also, augmented reality leads to all sorts of opportunities for education, because it can really let you experience phenomena in a way that's impossible in the real world. So for instance, if you have to learn something about all the planets that we know, of course, again, you can read about this, you can look at some pictures of those planets that are sort of recreated on the basis of real information. But wouldn't it be way more convincing if you could just see those planets flying right in front of you? You could also have a look at their relative distances, one compared to the other, which is way harder to imagine if you're just reading about it or looking at a picture. Of course, this is not possible in the real world, right? You cannot just take a tour towards all those planets and have a look at them in that way from a first-hand perspective. But using AR, using your phone and just projecting those, in this case, digital planets into the real world at relative distances to each other, you could even spin them around, look at them from different sides. This might actually lead to better learning about concepts than just reading or watching pictures, watching images. Here another example. So here people developed a certain t-shirt with a certain pattern on it. And if you point your phone at it, at this pattern, it recognizes the pattern and then replaces this shirt by people's organs inside their body. So you would actually have a real world-like view of those organs that you would need to learn about, for instance, in the case of a biology class. That would be much more convincing what would be in 3D, much more convincing than a 2D textbook or a picture of it, perhaps, because you really can more or less look into someone's body who's wearing this t-shirt. So really, again, a different type of learning that perhaps might make a more lasting impression on pupils' memory, such that they would recall it better and remember it for a longer period of time. Yeah, and finally, I think this is definitely a project I wanted to discuss. This is really my dream. So here, Doron Friedman, that you see here in this picture, in his so-called beaming project, what they're doing is developing virtual teachers. You can see where this is going. So they develop virtual teachers that can deliver a class. So the idea is beforehand, the audio, for instance, could be recorded of a lecture, and there would just be a virtual agent presenting this information from a screen, for instance, or even in 3D through VR headsets. This part is not yet super impressive. I think this can be relatively easily done. So I could, for instance, record everything I want to be saying during lecture, render that onto a virtual agent, and then the virtual agent can present this to you during a class. The lip movements of the virtual agent can be synchronized with the speech sounds, such as it sort of looks a bit impressive. It can be facial expressions that sort of match my facial expressions typically. I mean, all this can be done. What's nice about this project is actually that students can also ask this virtual teacher some questions. And there's some speech recognition built into this virtual teacher to recognize those questions. And if it recognizes a question, it also has a knowledge base with the correct answers. So for instance, one of you would ask a question because something is unclear. You would ask a question to this virtual teacher. The speech would be recognized by this virtual teacher, and the virtual teacher would sort of select a response from their basic responses that they have stored in their memory. So I think that's very nice. And what's even nicer is that in certain cases, of course, this virtual teacher won't recognize what you're saying, either because it's a bit noisy or because it simply doesn't have the pre-programmed answer to your question. And what this virtual agent, this virtual teacher can do then is actually call the actual teacher, repeat the question because it recorded the sounds. And then the actual teacher would actually respond to the virtual teacher what the answer is, and then the virtual teacher would say it to the class. So I think this is sort of a dream for me, of course, because this could mean that in a couple of years, that I would just hire one of those virtual teachers who could deliver all classes, and then I can just go to the beach or so and wait for a phone call if something is unclear, or spend my time in a different way. Isn't that nice? I think this is very impressive. We'll see whether this will actually happen in a couple of years. And until that time, I think, yeah, I'll just keep on doing my job.